Can you talk about what's happening with the Michigan race and everybody's freak out? I shouldn't say everybody, a certain segment of the population's freak out.
Look, I've known Abdul for nearly a decade, and I've known him to only be focused on one thing, and it's how do we heal people in a meaningful way. He went to medical school, became a doctor because he wanted to provide alleviation to people's suffering, and he learned very quickly something we've all experienced, that the system is actually not just broken, but it's exploitative, and it's designed to exploit and extract as much wealth, not to heal people, not to cure illness, but to extract as much wealth out of people, to the point where we have the worst life expectancy in the developed world. We have the highest maternal mortality for Black women is 300% that of white women. We have the highest infant mortality. We have 500,000 medical bankruptcies a year. 70,000 people a year, according to a Yale study, die due to lack of healthcare. And so his whole mission is, I want to run for office, I want to get elected so we can provide healthcare access. And I think what scares the establishment, the Chuck Schumers of the world, the Apex of the world, is that this guy ran in a seat that is supposed to only be a conservative purple red seat that Trump won twice, that a progressive can't possibly win in. And, Michael, we were talking offline about what progressive means. I don't even know what it means anymore, but somebody who fights for these working families things shouldn't be able to win. He was outspent 11-1, had the most vile attacks against him and his character, and he still won. And if you compare to 2024, by the way, when Alyssa Slotkin ran against Hill Harper, who ran as the left-wing candidate, she trounced him like 75-25. And so for him to come in and win this against two formidable opponents and do so while being unapologetic, I think that just scares the hell out of the establishment. And look, they should be scared, because I think this is a continuation of what we saw in New York City with Zoran Mamdani and the 8 more candidates that he endorsed, is what we saw with Chris Rabb in Philadelphia, with Melat Kiros out in Denver. We're seeing this happen all around the country, and I think it's just getting started.
Yeah, Qasim, it makes perfect sense to me that he has a medical background, because my interpretation of the majority of his platform, I mean, if you just do the 30,000-foot, viewpoint, is he wants to heal people and make their lives better.
Yeah.
He's looking to, mend this vast conflict that we have right now in this country between right and left.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't even, like we were talking about with progressives and these other labels, I don't even know what those things mean anymore. But he's about putting people first.
Yeah.
And I think that scares corporatist Democrats like Chuck Schumer, because they have become beholden to corporations and to big money, and they no longer are able to thread the needle between serving those interests and also serving their constituents. But we also talked offline about, I talked to a lot of older Americans that identify as Democrats who don't see themselves in alignment with the Chuck Schumers, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Hakeem Jeffries of the party at all. To use the term colloquially, they view themselves as much more progressive. And these are people like my mother's age, in their late 70s, who don't see any common ground anymore with, what people describe as moderate or centrist politics. And that's not to say that they're extremists. They just believe in things like free healthcare and, food stability and, getting rid of homelessness, like things that are basic human needs, have all of a sudden become radical ideas in 2026 America.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a question of what are we prioritizing. I was talking to Maurice Mitchell, who's the executive director of Working Families Party, and he brought up such a thoughtful point that he goes, look, we believe in a big tent Democratic Party, but it shouldn't be so big that the tent includes the billionaires who are exploiting the workers. And that's the problem with Chuck Schumer, that he's like, yeah, I want a big tent party. I want the working class folks, but I also want the executives at Goldman Sachs, and I want Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase, and I want to find a way to appeal to the Elon Musks of the world. It's insane. You can't do it. And to me, and a lot of my writing and content focuses on this. Like I'm extraordinarily critical of Donald Trump and the J.D. Vances and Marco Rubios of the world. I'm extraordinarily critical of like the white supremacist mentality that is just devastating our country right now, that helped ignite the January 6th insurrection and the violence that ensued from there. But I also understand that this is not a war of conservatives versus liberals, progressives, again, whatever label you want. To me, this is not a left versus right battle. This is a situation where we are facing the worst wealth and income inequality in modern American history. Worse now than it was after the Great Depression. And what's perpetuating it are these culture wars that convince us that, hey, your lack of housing isn't because BlackRock bought up 500,000 homes and sat on them so the pricing goes up. It's because of the trans kid in a college sport. Or that your lack of health care isn't because United Health is denying care that they know will work and forcing people to die and into bankruptcy. It's because there's an immigrant who's undocumented and still filing their paperwork. Right. It's nonsense, right? And I think for me, my goal is, how do we have these conversations with folks who may have voted for Trump, but to understand that they want the same economic things that we do. They want the same, security and safety net that we do. They may approach it a different way, but that doesn't mean that they care any less for their kids than I care about my kids. I think that's why Abdul was so effective, by the way, in winning this seat in Michigan. It's why Zoran was so effective of winning by just a landslide in New York City. Why Mailad Quiros was able to defeat a 30-year incumbent in Colorado while working as a barista and making $15 an hour. I think it's that message of economic populism that you mentioned, Michael, that let's call it that for the sake of discussion. That message works. It resonates because at the end of the day, if you can tell me that I will be able to feed my kids, then you have my trust and we can move forward there.
Speaking of feeding kids, we're now seeing data that people can't afford McDonald's, that they're slumping, that the Subway, I saw reports. And so people are eating out less to be able to afford the necessities. So do you think it's easier now to get this message across to people? Because at this point, who can say that they're winning? Because I used to see a lot of that, even when the tariffs were hitting, people were like, oh, I'm still doing well. And it was like, oh,
yeah. My kids were begging for a pet, so we decided to get chickens, which I don't know if you guys know this, but like baby chickens, I'm new to this whole world. So people watching are probably laughing at me because we've got a good lawn, and I'm like, we can get a chicken coop. You can get a decent coop for a couple of $100, which again is not cheap, but when you do the math on it, those baby chickens cost like $2. And after about 3 or 4 months, they all produce about 1 egg per day. So my thing is, if I make the investment now, if you look at what we spend on eggs over the course of a year, I can knock down the egg prices and get my kids a pet, and it's just be a win-win situation.